So that's what I'm trying to say. Green finance starts with very good intentions, but it's sitting on very naive assumptions.
Hello and welcome to the Circularists. And today I'm delighted to be talking with Pierre Lenders, who is a financier. And in the climate space, we don't often get the opportunity to talk about someone who is an expert in finance. And we'll talk about how we're going to get to where we need to be. So Pierre, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So Pierre, I've done that brief introduction. Would you take the reins and expand on that? Tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and what your vision is.
Yeah, no, you were spot on in terms of the resume. You look at the resume, investment banking, fund of hedge funds, hedge fund now. So I'm the typical expression of the pure capitalist guy. Although underneath, probably because of my education, my father is a pastor, my mother was a teacher. So I've always had values that were not exactly the ones that are, often associated with finance. And for the last 12 years, I've been very passionate about trying to reconcile, short-term goals of finance, which is to make money, with the obligation, frankly, to continue to have a planet going forward for most of us.
Right. Wonderful summary. So let's kick off then, Pierre, because we've had a little bit of a preamble and we've acknowledged, and I think it's becoming more widely vocalized, things are worse than we thought they would be at this point in time.
Yes, and if I may illustrate with an image, you can probably see this image with the video. It's the images of, those cartoon where a coyote is pursuing some foe and he's running, but at some point he doesn't realize that he's run off the cliff and is already meters away from safety. And I think as civilization, we've done a bit the same. We only now start to realize how damaged the planet is from all sorts of angles. I mean, it's not just climate change, as you know, it's the 9 planetary boundaries.
Right.
6 of them have been crossed already, probably putting us in a place where if we were a few millions, probably we could survive. With many billions, it's going to be a hard journey.
Talk to me about green finance. We've had the activists raise the alarm. There's generalized awareness now of the dangers, although I don't know if we collectively acknowledge they're as bad as they are. So, but the alarm has been raised. It is time to urgently fix or try and redress or pull back from the cliff edge. Finance is going to be a big part of that. Can you tell us about green finance and what your thoughts are on how finance can facilitate the salvation of humanity?
Yeah, well, the very short answer is that finance alone certainly won't fix it. That it would be very naive to think that finance can pursue something that doesn't coincide with its well-entrenched purpose, which is to make money very long. I mean, eventually you can always find 2-3% of the people around, or for most people, they would always accept to have 2 or 3% of their wealth being sacrificial, if you want, ready to be spent on purposes that potentially would prove non-economical. But that's about it. And I think there's been an illusion that built during the years 2015 to 2021 because of a number of circumstances that I can eventually delve into, but where suddenly more and more people jumped on the bandwagon of green finance. I mean, they decided to decarbonize their portfolio, to buy green stocks, to buy well-rated stocks using criteria that are supposedly non-financial. Mm-hmm. And because everybody was going from not having done that to starting to do a lot of it, that had an impact on the prices of those companies that they were all picking up.
Right.
And therefore, it created an illusion of performance. It created the illusion that by being a good guy, you would make money. And so more people jumped on the bandwagon not claiming that they wanted to make more money, of course, but claiming they were also joining the club of people who wanted to be responsible.
Right.
Now, the problem is if you have that as the only engine for your decision to observe that it worked financially, you are almost certain that this will end up in tears, that will be a bubble.
Yes.
As soon as you've exhausted the ability of that overperformance just coming from financial flows going towards the same stock, the phenomena completely reverse. And you had a perfect illustration of that as Mr. Putin invaded Ukraine, and suddenly gas became much more expensive and oil became more expensive, and oil and gas companies were suddenly having a fantastic time in terms of cash flow. And all those investors had shunned those type of companies from their portfolio. They were sort of forced back in.
Forced back in for how?
Into buying oil and gas companies, because you cannot stay away from the well-performing part of the economy if you are in finance for very long.
Right.
Because even if you are attached to your moral conviction that you should not encourage oil and gas exploring and drilling and producing, if you underperform your peers for 2, 3, 4 years in a row, you're out of the market anyway. All your investors will leave you, and it will be in vain. So that's what I'm trying to say. Green finance starts with very good intentions, but it's sitting on very naive assumptions.
What would you change and how?
Yeah,
to align finance with our needs as humanity?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with an introspection, really, having a proper theory of change for investors. Investors should be going beyond what seems obvious intuitively when you don't think too much about it. Like, it's enough to put pressure, moral pressure on investors for them to align their portfolio, for instance, with a zero carbon world. So you would tell them, stop buying fossil fuel companies, stop buying polluting companies. That's at the heart of what is called green finance today. The problem with this view is, unless you address the demand side of the equation, if you only focus on the supply side of the economy, what will happen? Let's take the example, we were just talking about oil and gas. So I take the example of Shell or Total Energy, that are sitting in countries where citizens are maybe a bit more vocal about the need to clean the economy and to push this concept of green finance. And you will ask these companies to reduce their production. But it's in a context where governments continue to spend money to encourage consumption of all sorts of things that are fossil fuel related.
Right.
Because we all know in agriculture, in mobility, we had a president saying, I love the car, j'aime la bagnole. And there is a highway that is being built in France right now, which is completely, goes completely at the opposite of what needs to be done. We want to encourage people to use bikes and buses and trains. So if you don't address the demand side and only focus on the supply side, the only thing that will happen is that the same quantity of oil anyway will be extracted from the ground and burnt, and it will be no change in terms of the climate change.
Yes.
But it's just that the trade balance of the Netherlands or France will be deteriorated further.
Yeah, let's chat about a colossal drop in demand that will suppress the use of fossil fuels. Let's just look at that as a scenario. GDP is as a measure of the health of a nation, right? So GDP says go out and shop. And if you do that, and if you enter into this consumerist gluttony, our economy will be healthy. How, if somehow we could get into the minds of the masses and everyone pulled back from this idea that consumption is great, what would happen to jobs, and how would you turn and rebalance that so that there is work and people can live and livelihoods could be protected. How does that rebalancing occur? This is something that just I can't answer, but maybe you can.
Look, you asked me about jobs and what happens with jobs if we promote sobriety. We'll be poorer, right? Well, two answers to that. First, yeah, in a way, we'll be poorer. We'll have less money to spend on buying things we don't really need and that destroy our habitat and deprive our kids from their future. What's wrong with that? Unlike misery, sobriety is a voluntary reduction in spending and wasting. Second, let's stop fooling ourselves about how critical we are in producing what we consume. It's the machines who do all the heavy liftings, and they don't get paid a salary. So far, they've replaced human legs and human arms, but now they replace brains. Economists who fail to see this don't understand the matter at hand. We could almost go to the beach, so to speak, or devote more time for emotionally and socially fulfilling experiences. It's a political question, what we do with the fact we could absolutely think about jobs in a completely different way. I can only suggest that we remember maybe somewhere deep in our brain our ancestors before this whole obsession with building stuff and owning stuff and consuming stuff started, maybe with the domination of animals. So I'm going back before agriculture started. Apparently, for those of us who were lucky enough not to have been eaten by a lion when we were a baby, we had a fantastic life. We would work, a few hours a day. I mean, work meaning you go and look for the food in the forest, or you do some handcraft, or then the rest of the time is chilling out and being with the family, with the kids, with your friends. I mean, sometimes there were battles, probably, but that was never really brutal because you didn't have a pyramid, a social pyramid. You didn't have a big hierarchy. This thing, I think we should realize that mass consumption is not deeply entrenched in our DNA as our way of looking for happiness. It's an invention that followed a series of steps during this building up of the civilization, where very recently, in fact, I think the Americans invented it really in the middle of last century, or just between the two wars, where they realized when you are at the top, there's even a better solution than extracting as much as you can from everyone underneath. It is to actually make everyone underneath as rich as possible, to consume as much as possible, because now I'm no longer the landlord or the knight in his castle. And the only thing that matters to me is to have a big castle. Now I am the owner of a big corporate that sells iPhones, or that sells, and the more consumers spend, the richer I am. So we invented this obsession with consumption, and we made it even more compelling, hacking the brain with all sorts of schemes by which you make people feel miserable if they don't have as much as the Jones. So I think the good news is somehow, again, it's not in our DNA, it's very recent. So it could certainly be transformed. We could go to a very different place where the objectives wouldn't be to consume as much as possible. And you absolutely rightly point to GDP. I think there's some good news. At the European Parliament a few months ago, there was a very interesting set of debates. It was under the banner of EU degrowth. So we're starting to have people interrogating the choice of this parameter. Olivier de Schutter is also doing fantastic work on this. I recommend his book, where he talks about precisely this. We need to change compass. The compass cannot be the biggest possible GDP. It should be something more related to well-being for each human. That really should be the objective that the government should look to maximize.
Yes.
And so I think finance, to go back to green finance, misses it completely, because in a way there is a conflict of interest. If you think of it, you managing a fund, your income is coming from the commission you take, which are directly proportionate to the amount of the size of the portfolio. And the size of the portfolio goes up when markets go up.
Mm.
So the higher the GDP, the higher the stock market, the higher the fund, and the higher commission. So there's sort of a conflict of interest here.
Yes.
Unless you're a hedge fund, looking for hedge funds. Hedge funds don't care because they can short and they can, a market that goes down is not necessarily a bad news. But so there is this lack of in-depth thinking about theory of change. We think that asking corporate to change their behavior or their products will change the world without realizing that the problem is us as consumer. And so I think the finance people who claim they want to improve, chances to have a livable planet going forward should tackle this and should realize they should spend much more energy engaged with governments. Why is it that only citizens take governments to court? Why wouldn't financiers also take governments to court together with citizens, saying, guys, you're not complying with your commitment? Yeah.
Right. From what the impression I'm getting from what you're saying is that there's enormous power that rests with the citizen to abstain, to change their value system, and to just not buy into this. My self-worth equals the number of products in my closet. Are you saying that it should start there with ordinary citizens just having a change of heart and mind?
Yes, and I would say this differently. I say unless this happens, I'm very pessimistic. So we need to find ways for this to happen. Now, what would be the ways? Because of course we live under a governance which, by many anecdotal evidences, you could say, looks like it's been captured by private interests, and it's been captured by people who have an agenda, a clear agenda, to certainly make no change in the current situation, because that's the way for them to extract always more value from the system, and somehow that's the best strategy for them. We need to be a bit game theorist here. It's the best strategy for them, even if they know that this is very unsustainable going forward, but it will maximize their chances of getting a ticket to embark on the arc, 2.0. So to go back to your question, those who have most power at the moment, they don't want citizens to start thinking about, do I really need those many items in my closet, right? Because it plays directly against their interest, and even long-term interest, if they want to save themselves. So what you need is find ways to mobilize enough people so that they realize they would have the capacity. They need to get organized, and they would have the capacity. I think there was one extremely interesting experience, which was run in France a few years ago, was a citizen assembly on climate. I think Macron used this as a way to take pressure off during the Yellow Vest protest, as a way to show, I want to listen to you guys, and I want to open up and use more direct democracy ways. And it's actually fascinating to see how those 150 people, randomly selected in the population, initially, most of them, they had no real clue about climate change or very, bits that various bits they had captured here and there, but without making it a coherent picture and how much it affected their life and the life of their kids in a precise way. But they were given the opportunity to not only have free croissant and cafe, but also to listen to experts and to deliberate. And I think that's—
How did that go? How did that? This sounds fascinating. How did it go?
Well, it went very well in the sense that it ran for about 6 months, I think. I mean, they would not meet every day for 6 months, but they would meet regularly, on the weekends. And so it was not debates, it was deliberation. And I think that's really the key, is to reintroduce the possibility for people to get into a room and have conversation, where the point is not to try to convince not even the person in front of you, because that's certainly not going to happen, but the audience that you were right. But it's more a place where you can come quite open-minded and wanting to learn first.
Nice.
to learn from others, to learn from experts, and
Yes.
to realize, okay, but he may say this way, this thing this way because he's got a bias, or consciously or not, etc. And so it went well in the sense that of the 150 people, most of them initially had no real clue and no real passion for it and no interest in trying to save the planet, but at the end, they were all militant.
Oh, wow.
Because once you spend time enough to realize how important this is, maybe it doesn't look like it's very important, because people tell you it's going to be 1.5 or 2 degrees more. So what? I mean, I love it, I don't have to put so much heating in my apartment. No, it's absolutely the wrong word. It's not that. You're going to have extreme heat waves. You're going to have, terrible droughts. You're going to have problems with
Biodiversity
water.
loss and
Yeah, you're going to have,
acid
all
ocean.
sorts of species disappearing. It's not just 2 degrees. That's the worst way, scientists have come up with phrasing the problem. It's
I
so much
see.
more than that.
Right.
So when you are in these assemblies and you realize what's at stake, you see, oh, maybe reducing speed on the highway, going from 130 kilometers maximum speed to 110, will in general increase the length of a journey by a few minutes, but it will reduce emission by 20%. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah,
Everybody
it's
wants
incredible.
that.
Yes, incredible.
And you see, this is the sort of thing that people should really think hard about. How is it that it's an obvious thing that we should have done, but the government didn't implement it? So you have this disconnect, because to finish answering your question about how did it go, so it went very well in the sense that they came up with hundreds of more proposals of things like that, reduce meat consumption, etc. But then the government had to go and arbitrage and realize, okay, but if we do this, I have a problem with the far right party is going to criticize me for this, or here I'm going to have the lobby of the automakers industry, or that is going to not be very happy with it and threaten of delocalizing jobs or things like that. So governments are extraordinarily poor. Think also in terms of research, poor. They don't have the money.
Oh, okay. Yes.
They don't, because they have so much debt already.
Yeah,
because they always try to solve the long-term crisis with short-term money.
Yeah.
So they've cut on the places that would be so important, like research. Why is there so little good quality public independent research? Right. And why is all the research coming from private interest? I mean, in agriculture and agrochemical industry, this is absolutely the case, even more probably than in any other field. So yes, there would be ways for citizens, but they're not going to organize themselves without some sort of help coming from some of the powerful constituents in the system. And that's why, again, I'm saying financial institution, wake up. If you are not just conflicted, as I described, because in reality, you love nothing more than GDP, because that directly creates more income for you. Right. If you were serious about wanting to address the change, don't pretend you are going to make any difference by asking Total not to produce, because then it will be Putin producing the oil. Try to be a bit more serious. Think about the real root cause of the problem, its consumption. But as you said, we can definitely have a completely different way of considering what makes us happy.
There's a lot in there that's very daunting, but I'm feeling excitement at the possibility. So this pilot of the Citizens' Assembly is so encouraging that with education and with conversation, they found, you said they became militant, they started to care, they understood and they cared and they responded. So this is a model that really, I think we should urgently replicate everywhere.
I think so, absolutely.
I felt for a long time that, and you've just sort of validated this, I felt for a long time that with 8 billion citizens across the earth, we have enormous untapped power to bring pressure and to change. And I'm thinking now long and hard about revisiting a scheme that I had been talking with a friend about dropping consumption and making it okay, if not fashionable, to just hang on to what you've got, to repurpose. My mind's already shifted. I've always loved the new, the novel, to be in vogue and all of that. And my values have completely switched to repair, and I've moved my values away from stuff. That's not the highest value item in the world. What's in here is, actually. So
how did that happen?
How did it come?
Yeah.
How did it come? By researching what's going on with the environment, by entering into the climate space, by launching a sustainable clothing brand, by looking at how we operate systemically in the world and just being disgusted by it, the love for my son and his future and my descendants, and trying to do something different there. All of that together led me to think, why I wasn't born to love, like you say, I wasn't born to love labels and new stuff and you know, designer clothes. That's not in my DNA. But love is in my DNA, you know, and
it's so much harder when you feel alone. And you feel almost like a deviant person.
Yes.
Whereas it's your exact opposite. And you know, once you realize so many people around you actually are ready to make that jump.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So it's really this you know, this is for me is the most important element, is finding ways for allowing people to realize so many other people are actually embracing this vision. Although it sounds, you know, there was a fascinating survey done in the US recently where they asked people whether they would be ready to make some sacrifices so that things would get, you know, potentially much better for the environment. They had about 68% of people saying yeah, and you know, I can't remember the exact figure, but it was not giving away $3. I mean, it was something a bit serious about making sacrifice changes in your life. 68% people. But then what was really fascinating is they asked, okay, so we're going to run this survey and we're going to publish the number, you know, how many people are ready to make a sacrifice. But in your opinion, what will this number be? And so they collected all the answers that were provided to this question.
Yes.
And you know what the average was? 42%.
Yeah.
Which says that people that feel I would like things to change, I'm ready for change.
Right.
They don't realize that many people, a majority of people, want the same.
Yes. Yes.
So if you unlock that, you know, if you could make people realize that, no, it's actually an aspiration that makes so much sense, that would make us so much happier. We have the means, there was a technology, a lot of technical solution. But think of the internet, you know, citizen assemblies, you could organize things by internet as well. You could have, you know, making sure that all the discussion that happen with experts are easily summarized, and you can have access to them, you can search them, you can, and there's a platform that should be a public platform that should make that very easy to access. That is, of course, not what the government did in France with the citizen assembly, because the government didn't want the outcome to be impactful. But if they had wanted it to be impactful, they would have made sure that citizens beyond the 150 that were meeting with experts would have access, and would participate, and would throw questions, and would feel engaged with the process.
Right. But I draw so much hope and encouragement from that pilot that you've described in France. Pierre, your screen's frozen, by the way.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably... No, yeah, axiological in the sense that the question is not, and here I'm paraphrasing Aurélien Barraud, who probably no one knows beyond France, because I'm not sure if he often comes up on you know, on videos in English, but he's an astrophysicist and philosopher, and someone who's really passionate about life on Earth. And, you know, his take is we shouldn't even use the word environment as if it's a resource. I mean, you know, birds and worms, they have as much right to live as we ourselves. They're not all resources.
Yes.
But his point is, to say also, even if we had a way to produce energy in a completely environmental friendly manner, like we have now, let's say battery powered or hydrogen powered planes that are zero carbon, would that be a good thing? Because that would just mean that we would have even more tourists flowing everywhere and destroying around even more, because at the end of the day, energy is what is at the heart of every transformation process. Every transformation that happens in nature, that can be a nice, a beautiful, homegrown transformation, or brutal transformation by mankind who wants to exploit it and get more of it. The more energy you have, the more GDP you have. In fact, there's a perfect correlation also between the two.
Right.
And the more harm we create because of, for the moment, the way we project this energy to serve certain purposes. So we have to be very careful that if we think it's just greening our energy system will save us, that's completely wrong. It potentially could accelerate the disaster. And that's why he's talking about a need for, and that's very much what you brought up as well, for an axiologic sense, what it is we want. It's not, can we do what we do in a greener manner? It's no, it's what is it we want? What makes us happy?
Right.
And I think what often should not be forgotten, which often gets forgotten when we ask this question is, okay, but who is we? We all men happy and tackling the problem together, or remembering that there's a political dimension here. We can't, we can't be naive about that, because what some of us want is very different from what others want. And let's face it, that's going to be the main driving force. So the most likely scenario is a very bad scenario from here. So there's urgency in derailing that train.
Do you believe that we can, or that we will? Do you believe this train will be derailed?
I don't care having an answer to this question. I think you have to try.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we have to try. I mean, then it's up to each of us. Some of us, maybe that's also in the DNA. Maybe nature had made sure that within a population, for any species, you have this balance between, individuals care for themselves, but at the same time they care for the community. That's always in every species. You have that. I mean, in trees it's beautiful. That some oak trees, for instance, they get in a place. There are different species. They will feed through all the underlying networks of and mycelium. They will feed first their friends from the same species, other oaks, up to a certain point. If at some point they see that there are too many oaks and not enough of other trees, they say, we're putting ourselves at risk here, because we need biodiversity. Because we're good at, doing certain things and making sure, the environment stays friendly to us, but there are things we're not well equipped to handle. And pine trees maybe, or other species will be more equipped to handle. So they make sure that they never become too dominant.
Yes, amazing. There's so much that we can learn from nature, I think. I feel really encouraged. I feel so encouraged by so much of what we've touched on in this conversation. And I think the thing that's stoking my hope the most is what happened in France with this tiny citizens' assembly and the change of heart and the passion and power that is possible.
I'm very happy you're impressed by that, because I'm often surprised that it doesn't come up as the obvious tool that we have at our disposal.
Right.
To make
it's
changes.
Free, and it's powerful and free. And I think maybe the focus now should be to replicate that across the earth as quickly as possible in communities, gather, talk, educate, and then we're ready. People are ready to take action and to move.
Absolutely. It's a credibility asymmetry problem we have. You see, when things come from the governments and COP28 or all these big impressive assemblies where people have flown to using helicopters, and you have the media and all the micros are there, and it's very impressive. That must be important. That must be the truth, right? And so there's an asymmetry in credibility if you try to build something from the ground with community that doesn't have millions to put on this project, but with internet, and you have so many people that are willing. Another example that I will give also for France is the Shift project. It's called the Shift project.
Shift,
and it's about 20,000 people on a purely volunteer basis that have given some of their time to help build a picture of what a transition to a much more circular economy and a much lower footprint economy could look like, making sure that they think systemically, so that you cannot say, well, we're gonna stop producing cars because cars are bad. You have to think about, okay, what do we do with all the people who worked in the car manufacturing industry?
Right. Yes.
You have to train people. You say we have to insulate the housing, the buildings. Okay, but you need to train people. So you need to know where you take people. How do you accommodate for having all the places where you have the trainers coming and you have the manufacturing skills that are necessary, etc. So 20,000 people have given a lot of their time to build up something that looks like a coherent plan. It's called the Plan de Transformation de l'Économie Française, PTEF. And I think it's, together with Citizen Assembly, it's a perfect example of things that can definitely be created from the ground up and then presented to policymakers.
Yes, right.
With the level of credibility
yes.
that they cannot deny anymore.
Yes. So, Pierre Lenders, it's been a wonderful conversation. I think we should have some more like this. I'm very much looking forward to sharing everything that we've discussed here. So thank you for joining me on the Circularists.
Thank you very much for this and wonderful project you work on.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.